Hi folks, Matt McSpirit here, Technical Evangelist and member of the Ops team here at Microsoft. Continuing our look at the 10 reasons why you'll love Windows Server 2016, we're back on Microsoft campus to meet with Nia, who's going to bring us up to speed with everything you need to know about security in the next release of Windows Server. Let's go meet him. Nia, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Matt.
Tell us what you do at Microsoft.
So my team works on security on server.
Nice.
And to break it down, it's security on wherever server is running. So data centers, hosting environments, hosting applications. We own security for all of these. And we work very, very closely with the Windows 10 security team and the Windows Azure security team. So when we think about security, it really spans across devices, environments, and clouds.
Talk us through some of the customer challenges that our customers are facing around security.
Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that customers today are being attacked and security is top of mind for customers and IT organizations. And we see emerging threats from governments, from crime organizations, and as well as from different organizations that are after either the customer's data or after hurting the customers and using something called ransomware to encrypt the data of the customers and ask them for money in order to release that data to them. And when you think about how attackers are attacking the environments, we traditionally try to safeguard the environments by firewalls and intrusion detection systems. But what we find is that attackers can easily come into the environment using phishing technologies, compromised administrator passwords, or just using vulnerabilities in the environment. And then once they're in, it's much easier for them to go ahead and exploit the environment. We actually see from research that it takes 24 to 48 hours once an attacker is in the environment to go and attack and get control over the full environment without being noticed. And the attacker can stay dormant in the environment for many, many months then without being discovered.
Wow.
And when you look at the problem set of if an attacker is inside the environment, what do? You start thinking about identity as the major part of your boundary. If somebody can compromise your identity, they can then go ahead and take over your environment. You start thinking about what do you do with your servers to be able to actively protect against inside attackers. And how do you detect these attacks? And what do you do with your infrastructure to secure it accordingly? And also, how should you think about developing applications when you think about these security challenges?
Okay, so there's a couple of key buckets that you've walked through there very briefly, but let's focus in on identity to begin with. What do we mean when we want to make sure that we're securing from an identity perspective? What kind of technology we're talking about there?
That's an excellent question because, the first and foremost, most of the attacks that we see, I would say 99% of them are based on compromised identity and attackers being able to get privileged access to resources and from there on, use their privileged access to move around the environment and gain control over the entire environment. So if you think about it that way, you want to be able to reduce what administrators can do in your environment. And that has several facets. The first facet is about time. Today, if somebody is an administrator, they're an administrator for perpetuity.
Yeah, 24/7, whenever they need it. Yeah.
Exactly. And nobody notices when somebody takes over that account and is able to go and do malicious things with that account. So the first thing is to move administrator from perpetual administrators to just-in-time administrators. So if you think about an administrator, they need administration rights to do something when they want to fix something on a server or change some process. Why not have a workflow that allows them to be an administrator when they need to for only the amount of time they need to be an administrator? And then if you introduce that, you can also audit the fact that they're administrators. So now you have full control over when somebody is an administrator. You can introduce into that workflow gates such as, to two-factor authentication. So that to be an administrator, you need to go through two-factor authentication. So it's not only enough that I compromised your password, I now need to steal your smart card or your phone, and that becomes immensely harder for attackers to do. The next part of after just-in-time administration is what we call just-enough administration. Let's say you're a SQL admin. You should be able to manage your SQL server. There is no reason that you should be able to go and do other things on the server. So we want to be able to allow you to do your work, but only your work and nothing else.
Right.
So just-in-time limits you in time. Just-enough administration limits you in what you can actually do.
Right.
And then last, it's all about protecting the credentials that are on the servers. So when you go into a server, and let's say a server has been attacked and has been compromised, we don't want that server to be the place where the attacker can jump to other servers.
Right.
So we want to make sure that even if the attacker is on the server, they cannot harvest any credentials that would be useful for them to go and attack other servers in the environment. And for that, we use Credential Guard that was developed at the onset of Windows 10, a security feature that's using virtualization-based security to protect credentials from administrators on the box. So all these three things really give you the solution of controlling your privileged access and thus allowing you to prevent from attackers to gain access and control for your environment. So even if an attacker attacked your environment, with these solutions in place, they would not be able to actually go ahead and fulfill their attack purpose of being able to take control of your environment. We developed all these things and we talked to many customers, and what we found out is that customers really want to protect their privileged access, but they don't know where to begin. So what we did for that is we worked with the Microsoft consulting services, and we came up with a plan on how to help customers deploy and monitor privileged access in their organization so they can secure the privileged access.
Right.
And the whole goal was to give our customers tools that they can use today, with guidance that they can use today, to deploy in their current environments. Not even need to wait for Server 2016 to come out.
Right.
They can just use it in their current environment. And we developed a full plan that allows customers to walk through what they should do in the first 4 weeks, what they should do in the next 3 months, and what they should do in the next 6 months to be able to gain that control over privileged access. And we also showed them in that plan what are the different attack vectors that they're going to block when they deploy these technologies.
Wow.
We have many customers that are using this plan to start protecting the privileged access.
Cool. So there's lots of stuff. So not only the technology, but also methodologies and guidance on helping customers get started. Great. So that's identity. What about the servers themselves? What are we doing in Windows Server 2016 to help protect on the server?
Yeah. So as you said, with identity, we want to protect current environments. We don't believe that people would go and just uplift all the environment for 2016. So the next piece of thinking is, okay, now that we're going to introduce 2016 into the environment, how is it going to be an active participant in the security story of that environment? So we take the server from a passive, observer and a passive component that just waits to be attacked and potentially be compromised, to an active component that's actually protecting itself as well as announcing to the environment that something is wrong. So if you install Server 2016 in your environment to run a new application, either as a virtual machine or as a physical machine, Hyper-V, or to refresh your infrastructure, your DNS, your domain controllers, and so on, Server 2016 comes with built-in technologies to protect itself. So the first one is called Control Flow Guard. And what it does, it allows you to block threats for unknown vulnerabilities.
Right.
So if you think about, there's a vulnerability on the server that we don't know and we didn't patch yet, Control Flow Guard allows you to make sure that even if an attacker tries to exploit that vulnerability, there's a few very common vectors that Control Flow Guard will just not allow that attacker to exploit.
Right.
So that's an active way to mitigate unknown vulnerabilities. You still need to patch your servers, but Control Flow Guard would help you with cases of unknown vulnerabilities and so on. The next component there is to make sure that you can only run software on the server that is allowed to run on that server. So if it's a domain controller, for example, there's a set of software that you run on this domain controller, nothing else should run there. Everything else should be tagged as malicious. That's called code integrity. And with code integrity, you can whitelist all the binaries that can run on your server. And the way that we implemented it is again using something called virtualization-based security that allows us to whitelist what can run on the server in a way that even an administrator cannot modify.
Right.
So even if an attacker takes control over your server, they cannot modify what's running on your server. So they cannot inject malware into that.
Okay.
And if you take Control Flow Guard along with code integrity, you actually get a system where not only you can't exploit vulnerabilities, but even if you try to run malicious code on the server, nothing can run on it. And of course, all of this is being then audited and sent over to security systems so that things like trying to run malicious binaries can then be detected. The next technology is about just anti-malware. Having Defender on the box, optimized for server, is the first time that we actually have it in the box on by default. You install the server, it's already with anti-malware protected.
Yeah.
And it's really something that we worked hard to make sure that it's just optimized. You don't even need to think about it. That's the beauty of, one of the beauties of Server 2016 is that a lot of the technologies in there, like Defender, Control Flow Guard, Credential Guard we talked about, are just in there already.
They're just there in the background. You don't need to do anything. They're just helping you out. Yeah.
And the last piece of that is also reducing the attack surface using nano server. So we started taking workloads like DNS or IIS and making them or nanofying them so that they can run on a very, very small footprint, reduced footprint on the server so that the attack vector on this is much more reduced. Of course, with the other benefits of it being small, light, portable, and so on.
Yeah.
So all these four really make the server much more secure. But we also added into the server, we added new auditing events for security. And these auditing events come directly from our Security and Operations Center in Microsoft, where the Security and Operations Center team told us, we need to get these events in order to be able to identify attacks in the environments. So we added this into server as well as to Windows 10 clients.
Right.
So now, when somebody is trying to attack the server, when somebody is doing malicious activity, the server will report it through the auditing event, and then the systems that monitor auditing events would be able to pick up that malicious activity and better report on it. So we both make it threat resistance as well as make the server an active participant in your security.
Nice. So loads of stuff there in protecting servers and loads of stuff built in, which is great. And I particularly like the nanofying of things. But what about securing the infrastructure on the whole? What other investments we've made on protecting the fabric?
That's a great question. You know, with everything being virtualized, from any server, any application server to the infrastructure servers as well, like domain controllers, we find ourselves in a situation where we can't just think about virtual machines as we think about physical machines. From a security perspective, and I'll just give you an example. If you just virtualize your domain controller, and I can tell you most of our customers do, even if you have, say, 2 or 3 domain administrators, by virtualizing your domain controller, you have just moved the fabric administrators, the folks that manage your storage on the fabric, the folks that change your hard drives, the folks that manage your network, the folks that manage your backups, the people that manage the fabric itself. You just move them to be virtual domain administrators because they can just go into the fabric, go into the virtual machine image, and either copy the password files and try to crack it, or just insert some malicious software into these domain controllers.
So I, as the Fabric admin, could literally just grab the virtual hard disk that is the domain controller, take it off, and because it's a file, I could move it somewhere on my USB, take it home, crack it, and extract the Active Directory database.
And no one would know, right? No. It's a completely undetectable, or you can even take a snapshot and do that, right? You don't even need to touch the...
That's right.
Like we have great technologies that help you quiesce the machine, get a good snapshot, and then you can take it wherever you want and do whatever you want with it.
Wow.
Again, when we think about, in the mode of thinking about what happens when the attacker is in the environment, this becomes a huge issue. And we've seen active attacks that people attacked from the VMs from the Fabric. It becomes even a bigger issue for hosters that are hosting multi-tenant VMs. So we really had a huge effort in Server 2016 to try and solve this problem. And we call this effort Shielded VMs and Guarded Fabric. And the whole idea around Shielded VMs and Guarded Fabric is that the VMs, when they're running or when they're at rest, we want to make sure they're protected. So the virtual machines are encrypted at all time,
right,
until they start running on a Hyper-V host. And when they start running on a Hyper-V host, we would only allow them to run on Hyper-V hosts that are healthy. And the way we check the health of that Hyper-V host is through a process called remote attestation. So we're able to check from the hardware up to the Hyper-V running on it that it's pristine, that it has the right code integrity policies, there is no debugger attached, that it booted as we expected, and that its hardware identification is appropriate for that fabric.
Right.
And only then we would release the key material to run that virtual machine on that host.
So to clarify then, I wouldn't be able to take a shielded VM, copy it to a USB, take it home and run it on my Hyper-V host, because that wouldn't be part of our trusted guarded fabric.
Correct. You could actually send this VM over the internet. Nobody would be able to crack it open because it's completely encrypted.
Great.
And there's two interesting things that we did there to really make the story complete. One is we actually made a shielded VM just like a normal VM. So you can do, from a tenant perspective, you can do whatever you want to the VM that you used to do for normal VMs. You can live migrate it, you can copy paste it, you can back it up, restore it. You can do whatever a normal VM does, except for the Fabric admin does not have any access to the VM.
Right.
So they cannot console access even to the VM. The second thing that we did, we used the separation of duty concept so that any attack would be an attack of collusion between multiple people. So no one person holds both the keys to the VM and the access to the keys to the VM and access to the VM itself.
Right.
Unless it's a VM owner. The VM owner can always take the VM back and do whatever they want because they have that permission. But anybody else needs to have both the keys and the VM to be able to do something, and these are stored always in different places.
Right. So to clarify, if I'm the customer, you're the service provider, you've got the VM and the keys are separate, they're completely separated, different locations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And different administrators manage the keys and the VM, so you need collusion between them and really to break into the systems in order to actually get access to the VM.
Right.
Yeah. And this, we've been running this with multiple organizations to actually check the strengths, and we've had pretty good results. Again, no security system, I would call it unbreakable, but it just brings the bar so much higher than today's people just going in, copying something off into their USB disk and going off-premise with it. So I think this is a really great technology that we're bringing to the table here. And another important aspect here is that shielded VMs are running on a Hyper-V host. The Hyper-V host is 2016, but the shielded VM itself can be any generation 2 VM. So you can use new Server 2016 VMs, but you can also use Server 2012 VMs or Server 2012 R2 VMs. So you can use your existing VMs and shield them either when you create new VMs or shield existing VMs currently running on the fabric,
right,
so that you can better protect them.
Nice, and it's important to note that the scenario we outlined with the domain controller and taking in the USB, that's not specific to Hyper-V. That could be any virtualization
Absolutely,
platform.
yeah.
But the solution is unique to Hyper-V.
Yeah, I think that the main thing for customers to understand is that they want to understand who has access to their VMs and to their high-value assets. And when they run a VM on a fabric in a way that the VM is not shielded, the access is then granted to all the people that manage this fabric.
Right. Okay, cool. Awesome stuff again, incredibly innovative technology. The final area you mentioned earlier was around developers. So what can developers do to write more secure applications, or what tools can we provide them to enhance the security of their apps?
I think that's one of my favorite things that's coming in Server 2016 is the, we have embraced the concept of containers. I think that the open source community brought great concepts to the world, and I think we wisely embraced them. And when you think about containers, it's a great concept, but then when you think about security of containers, you start to get worried a little bit. Because when you're running containers have full access to the kernel of the host they're running on. So, while there's no specific things that the host allows the containers to do, they can take advantage of any vulnerability in the host OS to be able to compromise other containers.
Because they're sharing that host with the other containers, yeah.
It's like, the old VMs where the VMs were not well separated from the host, so they could DOS the host and so on. Containers are even less isolated than the old VMs. Right now when we run a VM, it's completely isolated from the host, and of course with shielded VMs, the VM is isolated from the host and the host is isolated from the VM. Regular VMs cannot break the host, they're not affecting the host. And of course regular VMs cannot also affect other VMs running on the same host. For containers it's completely open. And I think that's why people now run, they're kind of, if you look at the big provider, for security, they would run a container in a VM, which completely defeats the purpose. This is where Hyper-V containers come into the game. Hyper-V containers provide data isolation of the host from the container. So you can run as many containers as you want without affecting the host. That security boundary is very unique to Hyper-V in Server 2016. And I think that brings a great value to be able to run containers in real data center environments that care about their security. And if you start thinking a step forward, the way we implement containers is using nested virtualization, which basically is you run a VM within a VM. Many possibilities here. I'm not going to go into this. It's time warping things.
Yeah.
But now let's say you wanted to protect the containers from the operating system. You could easily run them in a shielded VM. Right. So you could run a shielded VM that hosts all your containers that you want, and you could have these containers both isolated from the host as well as the host isolated from the containers.
Wow.
So I think that this does not change the development model at all, right? Hyper-V containers and Windows containers look exactly the same way. It's just a switch that you choose when you run them.
Yeah.
So the whole development end-to-end story remains the same. But when you run your containers in your data center, you can now run them secure without affecting the host security. And I think that's a huge thing that the Hyper-V team did.
Yeah.
So if you look at the overall security now with Hyper-V containers running applications, with Server 2016 being able to protect itself, privilege access being protected, and the fabric being isolated from the VMs that are running on that, we have blocked the major attack vectors that we see when we think about what happens when an attacker is inside the environment and trying to break into my high-value assets and my data center.
Cool. Yeah, broad spectrum of security investments there. Phenomenal stuff. So if somebody wanted to get started with some of these investments, perhaps some of the ones that I want to learn a little bit more about, How do they get started? What's the best way?
The best way to go about this is to simply go to the Windows Server 2016 Security and Assurance TechNet page, where we have all the links to everywhere that's about security, and we'll give you all the information and many great demonstration videos about what we talked about today.
Great, and there's also guidance on how to deploy shielded VMs on there, so documentation. There's the MSDN documentation for Hyper-V and regular Windows Server containers.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's loads of great stuff on TechNet, so lots of resources for people to get started. So Nir, thank you very much. Thanks for your insightful views into security and helping us understand all the investments in Windows Server 2016. I've certainly found it useful, and hopefully you have at home as well. And please stick with us as we continue our look at the 10 reasons why you'll love Windows Server 2016. Thanks for watching.